Beyond the Bright Sea, Chapter 27. It rained the next day, and the one after that, a windy rain that stirred up the sea and kept us on the island. Pennikeys will still be there when we get to it, Osh said. He always had plenty to do, rain or shine, and didn't mind a chance to make paints and mend his gear. But I was eager for another crossing, mostly to tend the graves where my parents were buried, and to find what they'd left for me. I thought I knew where it was, but the rain gave me time to think, so that's what I did. Until a midday knock startled both of us to our feet. It was not a Miss Maggie knock. She was with them, though. The two police officers from the mainland, Officers Kelly and Reardon. All three wore oilskin ponchos, which they shed and shook out one by one before coming into the house. Miss Maggie had come barefoot, and her hair was down around her face, both of which were unusual for her, and I wondered at the change. The officers wore muck boots, but their trousers were none the less dark with seawater. As they stood looking around at our unusual home, puddles formed at their feet. Osh said to Miss Maggie, "So you sent your message." "Indeed I did," she said. "Did you imagine that I wouldn't?" She turned to the policeman. "This," she said, her hand on Osh's shoulder, "is the artist who drew the likeness of the man we saw on Pennikeys, the same man Crow saw in New Bedford." Officer Kelly flipped open his little notebook and licked the tip of his pencil. "Your name?" he said. Osh glared at Miss Maggie. "Daniel," he said through his teeth, looking away from the policeman. "Daniel what?" He paused. "Fisher," he said. I was glad the officers weren't looking at me. Miss Maggie's eyes, too, grew round for a moment when he said that. They turned to me, and Osh sat again among his painting things, facing his easel. "You saw the man again?" Officer Kelly asked me. "In New Bedford?" "I did," I said, "and I know his name, too." That brought them up short, though Officer Reardon smiled as if I'd said something funny. "And you are a young Sherlock Holmes," he said, bending a little, his hands on his knees. I leaned closer and said, "His name is James Kendall, from Carville, Louisiana, or near there." Officer Reardon straightened up. "And how do you know that?" I explained about the letter from Nurse Evelyn. She used to work on Pennikeys when it was a leper colony, and I was curious about some of the patients there, so I wrote to her. And she wrote back and told me some things about that man. Officer Reardon made a face. "Why would she do that?" I sighed, worried now that the story was coming out like this, so tangled up that I thought I might trip on it. "Because I asked her some questions about a patient who dug up a necklace on Pennikeys and gave it to her, and she told Mr. Kendall about that, and he stole it and disappeared. And then we saw a big man on Pennikeys with a southern accent who had dug holes all over the island." Officer Kelly was writing in his notebook. Officer Reardon squinted at me, frowning. "That's quite a story," he said. "And a hard one to follow," said Officer Kelly. "Where is this letter of yours?" I hadn't thought they'd want it. "It's my letter," I said. "Yes, but it's evidence," he replied, an edge to his voice, "and I'd like to take it with me." I looked at Miss Maggie. She nodded. "If you want to catch him," she said. I looked to Osh for his advice, but he was intent on his work, his back to us. I went to the cinema box and fetched the letter. Before I gave it to the officers, I took it out of the envelope and kept back the last page, where Nurse Evelyn had answered my words with her own. "Here, here," Officer Reardon said, reaching out his hand. "What's that about?" "It's private," I said. "Nothing to do with Mr. Kendall." I handed him the first page of the letter. "This is the part about him." They both read it silently, looking up at me from time to time. When they were done, Officer Kelly tucked it back in the envelope and then inside his notebook. "Well, this should make things somewhat easier," he said. "Now tell us what happened in New Bedford." I told them the parts that mattered to them, about Mr. Kendall appearing near the dock and then visiting the pawnbroker. I think he sold a gold locket in there, I said, but I don't know why he looked so angry when he came out. Officer Reardon chuckled. He likely got a lot less than he wanted for it, he said. Do you think he stole that necklace too? They both nodded. He sounds like a proper thief to me, Officer Kelly said, but not a very smart one to stay so close by. Officer Kelly put away his notebook. You three be careful now, he said. I don't expect he's stupid enough to come back to the islands, but I've seen plenty of stranger and stupider things in my time. Officer Reardon nodded. You'd be amazed what people will do when money's involved, he said. We'll see what we can do about this Mr. Kendall, though I doubt he goes by that name here. He turned to Osh. The picture will help. Osh nodded. Good, he said, and did not show his face again until they were gone. When the officers had left, I imagined them returning to the mainland, writing up a report, telling stories in the pub, spreading the news that the mysterious Southerner really had been digging for treasure. Do you think people will come out here now? I asked Miss Maggie, looking for whatever Mr. Kendall didn't find. Osh put down his brush and rubbed the back of his neck. How do you know he didn't find it? He asked, which gave me a start. I was stunned that this possibility hadn't occurred to me. Well, I guess I don't, I said slowly. I guess I thought he gave up and took off after we saw him out there. Maybe so, Osh said. Maybe not. Which will do nothing to stop 1,000 fools from digging up the rest of the island once they hear what he was after, Miss Maggie said. You don't think he really found anything, do you? I hated the thought that whenever Susanna had kept something safe for me, it was in a pawn shop somewhere. No, Osh said. I don't think he did. Nor do I, Miss Maggie said briskly, but somebody else might be luckier than he was, so we'll go out there as soon as the weather clears. The others came before the rain stopped. Miss Maggie heard about it at the grocery and came straight away to tell us. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my sums, which was usually what I did on the second day of a long rain, when she arrived, bringing a good deal of wind and wet with her. 1 day, she said. It took just 1 day for the first of them to come. She took off her poncho and hung it by the door. Again, she was barefoot, her feet little and white. Those police officers must have stood at the top of Nobska Light with a megaphone and shouted about it. Osh didn't seem concerned. Crows knows where it is. They don't. I put down my pencil. I do? Don't you? I thought about the weather on my cheek and the one on the wall of the leper cottage. I thought about the 2 lambs on Pennickys, about everything Nurse Evelyn had written, and everything she hadn't. Yes, I said, I think I do know where it is. And you do too, don't you? Osh nodded. Only one place it could be. Well, Miss Maggie said, are you going to tell me? Of course, I said, and we did. When we were done, Miss Maggie looked sad. We'll wait for them to leave then, she said, and when they're gone and we have Pennickys to ourselves, we'll go out there again and finish what Susanna started.